Place to be, though. It reminds me a little bit of a conference I spoke at once that was held in the Riverside Church in Manhattan, and I got to stand on the pulpit where I think Martin Luther King stood, and it was very humbling. I don't think what I said that day was quite as inspirational, but I did my best. I'll do my best today, too. Let's see. So I want to talk about holistic education as a philosophical counterweight to American culture, to the dominant worldview of our culture. So I'm not so much concerned with particular educational techniques or a method. I come out of Montessori training, but I don't think Montessori or Waldorf or Reggio or any single model that's been developed, as wonderful as they all are, I don't think any one of them is the essence of holistic education. It's a way of thinking that gives rise to different models and different approaches depending on the wholeness of the situation, the people who are involved, the community that you're in, what's going on in the world at that time. So that's where a holistic way of thinking takes on many different forms. So I want to give a little bit of a historical sketch. This is how I got into the idea of holistic education. I was looking at educational thinking in American history. Where do our ideas come from? Why do we have the system of public schooling that we do? Where did it come from? We can look back at 1837 at Horace Mann, the Secretary of Education in Massachusetts, and the kind of system that he invented that really was the beginning of our public system as it stands now. We can look at the politics of it, we can look at what he said about education, but there are deeper themes. He was part of a culture, he was part of a system of ideas, a worldview, and that's what I've always looked at to try to understand mainstream schooling and the alternatives to mainstream schooling. It's deeper than just your particular educational techniques or methods. So the mainstream view, when you talk about American culture or the public schools in American life, we start with this sort of celebratory image of the United States. This is the great land of democracy, the great land of freedom. The Declaration of Independence says, proclaims that we are here to celebrate life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And public education is meant to forward that in every generation, to support young people to live full and happy lives in a democratic society. There's some truth to that myth. There is some truth to it. There are many people in the system who believe in it and who work for it. And it works for some kids, for some families, for some communities. So it's not a totally wrong idea. But in many ways, it is a mythology. It is an image that our culture holds without appreciating the complexity of the reality. That the reality of American history and American culture is not quite so simple. Alongside that democratic and humanistic idealism, there are some other currents of culture. And those are the things that I've looked at to understand why schools aren't as democratic and nurturing and don't provide as much life, liberty, and happiness as we think they could and should. So if we go back to the early 1800s when the public schools were taking shape, you can look at it a number of ways, but I've identified 5 cultural themes that I think were dominant at that time and go a long way to explaining why the schools work the way they do. Why do we have so much competition and testing and control of children's behavior and rigidity, emphasis on intellectual knowing, certain kinds of intellectual knowing. Why is that? One of the themes goes back a couple hundred years, even before the founding of the schools, and that's the Puritan theological heritage of New England. certainly not everybody in American culture is a Puritan anymore, and they weren't even in the 1830s. But there's a line of thinking that is consistent through American culture, alongside this democratic, humanistic attitude about human beings. There's another way of thinking that says you cannot trust human nature very much, that we are, pick your favorite word, we are sinful, we are fallen, we are imperfect, we are animal nature, whatever that view is. It's a mistrust of human nature. And when you start from that fundamental mistrust, you have to control people. You have to have those who somehow have been disciplined or trained well enough to overcome their nature, that they now are in a position to take the next generation and to harness them, to moralize them. I'm not going to go into great detail about any of these themes, but if you have more questions about it, we can talk more about it. But in general, I see that theme going in and out of American culture, even when it's not expressed in very religious terms. It's built into the fabric of our thinking about children and about human development, that you have to have an atmosphere of control, of moralism, of discipline, because human nature just cannot be trusted. So that's one theme that I see operating. Another is simply to recognize that this is a capitalist culture. Now, I don't want to get into a big argument about capitalism versus socialism, and am I a Marxist or not? I'm not. But when you look at capitalism, leave aside, yes, there's freedom to own property and follow your individual pursuits, and through your hard work you rise, and all that. That's all true. But also, capitalism is a materialistic philosophy of life. When you have a society that is so thoroughly committed to capitalism, then economic and materialistic values rise to the top. Numbers start to rise to the top. Wealth, possessions. And what happens then is you start to put less emphasis on the inner life, on what you might call the soul, or the personality, the individuality of people, the higher qualities. We want to talk about compassion or love or things like that. We still have them. It's not that they've all been abolished, but in a culture that is so oriented to production and competitiveness and making a profit and satisfying the stockholders and turning nature into commodities, in a culture that's so thoroughly oriented in that direction, you do start to lose the other aspects of human nature. And Horace Mann and his colleagues, when they founded the public school system, were very explicit about that. They were very upfront and said, we support this new industrial system that is arising. The 1830s, 1840s is when the whole factory system was being created. People were coming off the farms to work in factories. And it was recognized very deliberately, we need to educate young people so that they'll go to work in these factories and be good workers, take their part in the capitalist economy. That was a deliberate purpose of public schooling right from the beginning. And we see it all the way through, all the way till today. If you look at any of the major reports and commissions and laws of the past 20 years, A Nation at Risk, America 2000, Goals 2000, and No Child Left Behind, there's an economic basis. It's all through it. Just you read a paragraph or two, and it'll talk about the importance of the economy and productivity, and that's a big part of what it's about. So again, this is not to say that we should just toss that aside and not care at all about what kind of work people are going to do in the world. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that a culture has a certain personality, a certain choice of values, what's really important to us. And in our culture, material and economic values are really important to us. They rise above just about everything else. A third theme that I think has affected schooling in our culture is the rise of scientific